From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
It's been an interesting week, first week of high school for my son, and using public transport to get himself there and back. So, going okay so far. It's been successful.
Yeah, so the date today, what is it? The 5th, 6th of February that we're recording? I don't even know what the date is.
It's Thursday.
It's a Thursday. It's early February, though. This won't probably air until end of March.
Yes, but it is our first recording of the year.
It is our first recording of the year. It is going to be rusty, people. Hang on. But, yeah, that's why we're talking about going back to school.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So what else? My 5-year anniversary of working here as well.
Oh, yeah.
This week.
Congratulations. Couldn't have done it without you.
It's true.
Not in the same way, at least. Might have done it a different way. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, congratulations for
5 wonderful years.
Glorious years.
It's been
no regrets.
Like that tattoo that says no regrets.
Regret. You want to get one of those? Yeah.
What else? You've just been to Melbourne. How was that?
Yeah, that was great. Catching up with a number of clients and prospective clients. I'll give a shout out to Lisa Manning from Linfox, one of our great clients. She does listen to every episode and did note that we forgot to put out the Christmas replay episodes. See, this is what happens when I take a holiday. I took 2 weeks off before Christmas going, yep, everyone is going to get everything done.
No, I had them scheduled.
They didn't go out, and Lisa noticed.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I don't think anyone else is going to be as eagle-eyed as you to notice that we forgot to put them out this year. We do it every other year, but it'll be fun. We know our marketing team's under the pump, so I have a lot of patience with them at the moment. So, yes. But the Adam Grant episode came out this week.
It did.
That we're recording.
Yes.
Which is a good one. If you're listening, Adam, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, but our guest, he can't even wait to be introduced.
Nope.
He's already contributing, so we should
so
probably...
excited to talk with us.
I don't want to be introduced now because I'm coming after Adam Grant.
And actually, you bear some similarities to Adam Grant, so let's introduce him in. He is well known among safety nerds for his excellent summaries of safety research on LinkedIn, which he expanded into a webpage and most recently a podcast. He holds qualifications in the areas of exercise science and occupational health and safety. He's recently been awarded a PhD in safety science through Griffith University. He's also the National Safety Manager at BMD Group. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ben Hutchinson.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It's it feels like it's been a bit in the making, actually trying to force me not force me to the show, but
encourage, Ben. We were encouraging.
To get out of my antisocial ways,
Yeah, I think it's at least a year, if not closer to 2, I reckon. And I said, well, Ben, now that you've got a podcast, surely you want to come on our podcast and tell people about it. But what episode are you up to now? You've just been flying through them.
So the audio Spotify podcast is now really slowing down, and I'm shifting most of my efforts to YouTube. So I'm at episode 71, I think. But I got a bit giddy. I recorded a lot of stuff, so I had a lot of stuff just to post. So I posted a lot of it. So I made pretty big progress in a short amount of time as far as total episode counts. But that's definitely changed now. It's slowed right down.
Yeah, and your format of your podcast obviously is a lot shorter than ours, so a little bit easier. But you have to come up with all the content yourself, whereas we get our guests to come on and provide the content for us.
When I developed the idea of the podcast and also my YouTube, I had some sort of ground rules that I need to follow, and one was to keep the overhead as low as possible because I have a day job. So as it turns out, most of the heavy intellectual lifting's already been done in the research. Like all I'm really doing is just parroting what they found. So I actually think it's harder to do these sort of formats because you need to come up with sort of insightful questions, read their prior works sometimes, read their books and papers. And I have huge respect to people that come up with their own sort of pure content every week on like YouTube and podcasts and write articles themselves. I'm not doing that. I'm just parroting research.
Yeah, and we'll get into your podcast in a moment, but Joelle will do the customary intro questions.
Our regular questions. Ben, what are your favourite podcasts?
Number one is Disaster Cast from Drew Ray. I really think this is a good 101 in safety science, risk and statistics. Now, it definitely doesn't have the whole gamut of things it's around its safety professional needs. Like if I wouldn't call it, the 101 for everything, but for safety science, risk and statistics, I still go back to it regularly. I probably listen to it literally 15 or 20 times or more. Every year I re-listen to it. I highly urge everyone to jump on there, find Disaster Cast and have a listen. It's absolutely solid for the content. And then other things like You Are Not So Smart. It's beautiful. I love it. Safety of Work, Hidden Brain and Cautionary Tales are ones I've been listening to more recently. Well, You're Not So Smart for years, but going back to Hidden Brain and Cautionary Tales.
Yeah, Cautionary Tales is one of my favourites as well.
Yeah, Dave Probin's really taking the foot off the pedal though with safety. I can't even remember what the name of the podcast
Safety
is.
Work, yeah.
Yeah, that's how infrequently he does it now.
Yeah, we'll pile on. We'll blame him. Yep.
Yeah.
Ben, can you tell us about your professional career, please?
Yeah, like most relevant to safety, I started in exercise physiology and biomechanics. And then I pretty much quickly moved into human factors and fatigue. So my early career was safety critical work around fatigue and human factors. And then probably like a lot of safety people, I didn't wake up skipping my step thinking I wanted to work in safety. I just sort of fell into it via human factors. And then I've worked in mostly high risk industries and construction since then.
That's a very brief summary.
There's really not much else to it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you've got that background now in academia, obviously got the PhD, now National Safety Manager, and you've held other senior positions before in safety. So, yeah, we like, and hopefully a theme of this year is we'll have more practitioners. I was talking to Joelle about that, trying to get some more people who, do the work versus the academics who study the work, because I think that's kind of the consistent feedback we're getting from our listeners, that they don't just want to be inspired by the research. No offense, Ben, because I know that's what your podcast is about, but they also want to hear from practitioners going, how do we actually translate that research into good practice on the ground?
Yeah, so, and this is actually a good segue. I haven't done a good job of promoting who I am, but I'm actually not an academic. My entire working career has been as an internal safety person or internal safety manager or human factors specialist. The academia has only been a side hustle, like it's a hobby that I've been doing on the side. So I get that question fairly regularly, or a bit of shock and surprise, like the Pikachu meme, surprise face that I'm not an academic. I'm actually an internal safety manager my whole career. So
I don't know if calling a PhD a side hobby is like a super flex.
well, how else would you do it?
I just did it on the side. Yeah, whilst working the senior safety role, I just knocked out a PhD.
It's like, yeah, might as well. Yeah. What have I got to lose?
Yeah.
Well, I said I finished it. I didn't say I did it well.
Well,
C's get degrees, Ben.
that's a high standard. P's actually get degrees, but
what's a P? Pass.
Pass, yeah.
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 Okay.
And
well,
PhDs
I meant
are largely pass-fail, I'm pretty sure anyway.
Yeah, I meant C's as in like
credits.
A, B, C.
Yeah, I get it.
What's important are the friends you make along the way, apparently, which was almost none.
So you missed that. All right. Well, look, the podcast that you started, Ben, and you're over 70 episodes in, and now it's, like you say, transitioning to YouTube. It's called Safe As. I've listened to a number of the episodes. They're really great, concise summaries of research. But what are your goals for the podcast, Ben?
It's really been the same as when I started, I guess, with the social media journey. My goal is to try and get more of this research that sits behind paywalls into this more public domain. And it's just frustrating as hell. certain fields like medicine, healthcare, and allied health, when I started exercise phys, I think we had a stronger empirical evidence-based underpinning, and certainly medicine and other industries do. Whereas safety, it definitely has a large evidence base, not particularly great quality yet. I think it takes time, but it is there. But I think the practitioners are so disconnected compared to physios and OTs and doctors. Now, it has its reasons why, and I don't necessarily think, I'm not naive enough to think if we start getting everyone with a PhD working in safety, we'd have better performance and better inputs, better outputs. But there just did seem to be a really strong disconnect between the two compared to, even human factors. When I worked in human factors, we talk about evidence-based techniques and models really regularly, and that they're just part and parcel. And then you enter safety, and it's just almost like a wasteland in comparison. And that may not be bad necessarily, but it was obvious, sort of visible to me. So that's why I don't want to just write articles that interest me, which is fine. People's own experience is fine. I think there's more than enough opinions and anecdotes. I wanted to provide a different stream of data, which was from the research. So I just started posting it, and then that formed into the podcast and then the YouTube.
Yeah. And we'll go into more of the other things that you've done as well. But the podcast, like you said, over 70 episodes on a range of different research papers relating to occ health and safety as a broad discipline. Any favourite episodes that you did?
Yeah. I don't know about the episodes themselves. Like, I don't know if I did a particularly good job with these ones, but the topics I like is the safety myths. So safety myths and the Port of Auckland case with due diligence. Safety myths goes back to Eric Holnagel and Bernard paper, and they essentially just unpack some of the things that they think is holding back the safety profession or the safety industry or safety domain, whatever you want to call it. Things like most accidents are due to human error. And this one's really interesting. I don't know if we have the time to go through this one. This is a whole pod on its own, but even the idea of human error versus organizational factors, it's wrapped up in this scientific veneer, and there definitely is science to it, but it's largely more worldviews and philosophy, like your philosophical position. Like, are most accidents in an organization, is it 83% human issues, human error, or is it organizational? And I had this conversation recently with someone. I don't think there's really any clean way that science can answer that question, because if you take the worldview that everything can be traced back to a human, like if you look at organizational factors, it's still people that design and implement, utilize, maintain. So you could logically trace that back to some sort of human frailty, like a bad apple. So whether you consider that a organizational or human issue is really based on your worldview. So that's one that Holnagel in that paper and then the episode, they unpack some of those industrial myths, as they called them. And I think those things are, eternal's a bit strong, but I think these myths will hang around for quite a long time, because most of them, I think, aren't just safety things. They're more foundational to human. When humans organize, and that's what we do in society and organizations, we organize into groups. I think it's more foundational to there. And then the Port of Auckland case, this one's a bit more technical, but it's just a really interesting analysis in a Royal Commission and an inquiry around the fatality that happened, and then the duties that are expected of an organisation and the officers. And I think it was just really enlightening around what the legal side expects of us, and for some of these things, it's just the most. Any lawyer listening, they'll be smiling because it's stuff they've been saying for years, but it seems like there's a really low expectation from the legal side, but that really low expectation is still really hard in modern bureaucratic organizations. It shouldn't be, but we've created so many layers, I think it makes it challenging just to achieve. Like, we put a system in to manage working at heights or lifted objects, but it's really hard to answer the question, is that system effective? Like, how do we measure it? It should be simple, but I don't know if it always is. Or if it is simple, I don't know if we have simple answers developed in organizations. So that would be something we'd probably consider a myth also.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like you say, there's so much complexity and contextualization regarding safety. very hard to do randomized controlled trials, I guess, given the differences that organisations have in the nature of their operations and all the rest, right?
And then it introduces ethics. If you purposefully don't use an intervention with one group and someone's seriously injured, like there's the ethical considerations, there's legal considerations potentially. So very few organizations would do that. They would just say, like, don't get me wrong, we definitely do pilots. Like you pick 3 projects and try stuff, but it's not really the same thing as doing a really controlled interventional study. And I think we probably need to do more of that stuff. Not a study that we publish like in Science or the British Medical Journal, but definitely more of a controlled intervention that we can look to see if we've actually achieved our goals. And I think it's very challenging at times to look back and pat ourselves on the back and be able to show that we actually had some sort of tangible improvement somewhere in anything.
Yeah.
And with so many sort of confounding variables as well, right? When we're working with real organizations operating in, global environment with macroeconomics and political stuff happening, and then, internal stuff happening as well. It's very difficult to actually confidently say that our intervention created this outcome.
Yeah. And I think there's degrees of evidence too. And I think this is one of those things where I really, as the practitioner, you don't need large scale meta-analyses on, like, it would be good if we had it for all the things we do. But even at a very local level, at organizational project level, just having some sort of insights around how our systems are performing, and if we're rolling a new intervention in or a new form, a new inspection, whatever it is, just have a little bit of a think around how would we know it's succeeding and how would we know it's not succeeding. It doesn't require a large research institute. That'd be nice to have that data, but
yeah, I guess it's the difference between providing insights to the organisation versus, doing something that would be published and then
Standing
able to
up to peer review.
peer review and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, different standards of evidence apply, I guess. Yeah. So before you did your podcast, and this was how I became aware of you, was while you were progressing through your PhD, you were also posting a lot on LinkedIn with your summaries of the research papers that you were exploring as you were going through that. So I think you've probably already spoken to this a little bit, but what was it that sort of prompted you to go, yeah, I'm going to start posting about this?
So it turns out I've been doing the summary since about 2012. So I'm going to quote Anchorman, and in no way is that depressing. I was doing these well before my PhD. Originally, it was the frustration of paywalls. I read a lot of research. I read a lot of research when I worked in ex-phys. When I was a personal trainer, I still read research. So I've always done it. I've always been interested in the science. It was just a frustration that I thought, there's interesting stuff here. So it just really started just with a few dot points. And then it just grew over time into more structured summaries, with talking about. So I originally would only do just a few dot points from the discussion or the conclusion, the key findings, the stuff that you couldn't actually get out of the abstract is what I would start with. And that just grew over time. And that's really all to it. It was just the challenge of getting, I thought, good information out to the people that need to use it. And whether I would do it now, if I went back, I don't know. I'm in a different place in my career, but certainly like I said, I came straight from human factors and ergonomics and ex-phys, where there did seem to be a stronger coupling with evidence-based practice. So I was probably a little bit taken aback where at least maybe it was just with me, but my interpretation, but to see very little of that stuff flow through. And maybe a lot of it wasn't useful, even if it was available. I can't say that, but I just want to get more of it out there. And it ties into this idea now, I reflect backwards. I think it ties into this idea of the adaptive toolbox. So the researcher, Gerd Gigerenzer, he's talking about cognitive toolboxes, adaptive toolboxes, heuristics, and be able to pattern match. But I kind of like to hijack that idea around you have more ideas and concepts to draw on. So you have effectively more solutions to apply to something to see if something sticks. And you don't just have to have evidence for that, but it does increase sort of your repertoire of ideas to use. And if you want to get all nerdy, like cybernetics did this, they talked about requisite variety, and Ashley spoke about how only variety destroys variety. So if you have a complex system with 1,000 interconnections like points that can be influenced, you need more than 1,000 ways to actually properly nurture and guide that relationship. So you need something at least as complex as the thing you're trying to manage. So I see it the same with ideas. And that's not saying all ideas are equal, but certainly the evidence will help give us ideas that there seems to be some semblance of logic to it, and potentially evidence that it's been applied somewhere and it's seen to have drawn out some sort of benefits.
So from individual papers, you moved on to compendiums. I get a sense, and I think our listeners do, that you just seem to love science communication.
Now, that part is true. So I don't know if everyone's watched Cosmos by Carl Sagan, but Carl Sagan's Cosmos was just foundational for me. It changed everything for me. It got me onto Isaac Newton's work, and very, very hard science. Back when I started, I wasn't really that interested in psychology. In fact, I dismissed psychology when I started. I found it. I didn't have an issue with it. I didn't have an issue with the findings. I didn't think the findings were unscientific. I just found, the hard sciences, quantitative data, it's easier to assure yourself, to convince yourself that this is a real effect and you've studied it. Now I reflect back and I'm like, it's pretty cringe, because we don't need to pick one or the other. Like, we can use both. But so that's why I started with, one of the motives of starting with the research too was, yes, I was interested in it. I wanted to get more of it out there, but I also saw it as another element to help increase the industry and get more, evidence-based practices rather than just anecdotes and experience, which is important. So that isn't just malicious slander. That is true, that I do just like science. And the format of whether I've been successful in this, but definitely the guiding principle with the podcast and YouTube, to keep them really brief, is sort of the same logic, is that they're really not intended to give you a deep dive into topics. It's almost like pop science, like a TikTok. It's just to give you a very high level. Here's some ideas that can, you can think about, you can challenge, and here's where you can find the research if you want to dig it up. But the compendiums, yes, the compendiums are just an expansion of that, just to get more research out there.
So the last one that you published was around psychosocial risk, and I did actually share that recently with a client who was getting some internal queries around the relationship, in particular between psychosocial factors and safety outcomes, but then kind of broader questions around like health and that sort of thing as well. So it's been helpful for at least one person that I'm aware of, Ben, so thank you. So I would say the way that it was titled and the meme that you've got at the top of that one probably suggests that you were feeling a little bit frustrated. So can you tell us about what you were observing at the time that prompted that response from you? So
I've been doing social media for a while. I don't tend to get triggered too easily, but it does happen. But this one in particular. So there was a small vocal group of people on social media, particularly LinkedIn, saying psychosocial issues were just woke nonsense. And I hate the word woke, but that isn't what triggered me the most. It's when they invoked the E word, where is the evidence? And it was like, straight away, it was like a call to arms. And I was like, I am Jack's simmering resentment when I saw that, where's the evidence? Because I was like, it's right there, bro. Right? And I was saying, not only is there decades of research, it's barely controversial. And I was talking about my background in ex-phys and biomechanics. When you're looking at ergonomics, biomechanics, the psychosocial stuff has been covered for literally decades. We have large-scale meta-analyses that were published in the 80s. And even then it dates back. So like if you take particular issues, musculoskeletal, very specific, it's not as broad as psychosocial hazards as we'd look at under WHS, but not controversial at all that there's links between a whole raft of psychosocial factors. So I said, when I was doing my undergrad, and I would regularly be citing studies from the 80s and 90s, but more recently I've found stuff dating back to the 20s and 30s, even one from around 1910 that says enough is enough, we need to change. And it was talking about they didn't call it psychosocial, but it was a duck. It was quacking like a duck. It was the same sort of factors. And what I was reflecting on is this idea that psychosocial is modern woke crap. If we had all these hard people with pure grit back in 1910 saying we're breaking people and we need to change the conditions at work, what does it say around the modern weak woke people? Like, if all these strong people that went to war were still suffering the same stuff, and of course they were human. Biology hasn't changed, even maybe social norms and other things have, and stresses have, but human biology is the same. So I actually presented that to some of these critics, and of course they gloss over it. It's a very human thing to do. I'd probably do the same. I have my own biases where I selectively pick the stuff that supports my opinion. But that was my call to arms, was where is the evidence? And as it turns out, there's a lot of evidence.
Yeah. Look, I I very much enjoyed that compendium. And it is a nice one to just point to when it's needed. So on behalf of all of us who do work in the psychosocial safety field, thank you for that, because it's really nice to just have a single link to go, well, here you go, rather than having to post a whole list of stuff.
But I believe I know who you're talking about on LinkedIn, Ben. And
I can think of a few of them as well, yeah.
My feed is so much nicer now that I block them because, like you said, you actually go, where's the evidence? And seriously, it would have taken them 5 minutes in a ChatGPT or whatever, right? They would have come up with buckets of evidence. They just don't want to see it. You're not going to change.
It's not even that. It's that it's disingenuous because they know that the research is there, but it doesn't support their position or their argument to acknowledge it. So they will continue to, sea lioning basically is the type of behaviour that they're doing there, where they'll kind of jump up into a thread and throw in these arguments that they know are disingenuous, but they also know that it's going to...
well, it's controversial, which gets more engagement, and then...
Well, not only that, though, like it's going to actually influence people's views and people who are forming opinions or deciding whether to act on something as well.
Yeah, I usually give people one or two chances, Ben, but if they just want to be ignorant for the sake of being ignorant, I just don't need them in my life. So.
Yeah, no, what I've done more recently is I go by the philosophy of, assume positive intent. I think it's a good, humane practice. So I try and adopt that. And I have a 3 comment rule where I'll respond maybe 3 times and I sort of cap it at that. But on some of these, I've pushed back and I've been like, this is fine, to have your opinion, but let's at least frame it as this is your view. It's not a universal truth. And I pulled up a couple of people recently in one of the vocal communities in Australia. I won't mention the community, but they're well-intentioned, but they act like a cult. And please don't sue me. And I said, what you're presenting is really interesting. It's fine, but it's not an empirical statement. Like it's an opinion. I believe that, which is fine. But so I've tried to be a bit clearer around that and getting a clear separation between what is, an empirically supported statement. And that's even assuming we should use empirical evidence for everything, which we shouldn't. Like there's a lot of really important stuff that is very hard, if not impossible, to properly measure. So fully endorse that. But for certain claims that we make, like what is risk? And to say risk is X, Y, Z, or risk is one very specific thing, like that's a worldview. That's an opinion. That's a claim. That's fine. But there's really no simple answer to that. Just like what is safety? But yes, there's a few trials which I don't run into much anymore. But I'm sure the issues are still there. And look, and even just to give some balance to this, some of the, not many, I won't say I fully agree with, but I think there is a valid concern for me around whether this, I don't know what the right word is. I don't think it's a shift, because we're always supposed to do the psychosocial stuff. Like, it goes back pretty far, even in our legal system too. And ethically, we should have done it. HR have kind of done bits and pieces of it. So it's nothing new in that sense, but definitely there is a renewed focus and clarity around legal expectations. So there is a concern, a valid concern from my perspective, around we've still got the same finite resources and time, and how do we best balance that? So now, like, you look at in mining and some other industries, you have HSSEQ, something else. So it's like safety, security, environment, sustainability. You can do it, but you're taking time away. So there's always a trade-off. And I do wonder around the trade-off with psychosocial, just with other stuff. But then I reflect on, and I actually put this down for a later response, but you also can't separate psychosocial. It's embedded in everything we do as people, in organizations, in routines. So in one sense, yes, I'm concerned a little bit, but in the other sense, you can't separate it. So the better you get at the psychosocial stuff, the better you get at the really other critical stuff that we need to focus on too. So it's a tension, I would call.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
I agree with you. There are some valid concerns, and some of that is around, how do we interpret a duty imposed on the PCBU, and then how is that interpreted by the business, and how is that then assigned into responsibilities, and is it actually distributed appropriately, right? Like, where should ownership of different aspects of that duty actually sit? And yeah, if it's just, I'm going to dump this on the safety team and let them figure it out, then that's not a great approach. It does actually need to be that, thinking about, who's the risk owner, who's the control owner, who's the process owner, all of that sort of thing, and how do we resource it properly and that sort of stuff. So, yes, there's definitely, I think, valid concerns there around how this is actually allocated and whether it is done in a way that's achievable and sustainable within businesses.
Yeah, I agree. I think you put it more succinctly than I did. What she said.
Well, she's got 200 episodes of podcasts under her belt, Ben. So, mind you, we're long format, so it's not a muscle that we have to really use that much. We can say as much as we want.
We can, yeah.
But you've done the research, Ben, so what can you tell us that we can conclude from the existing research about the relationship between psychosocial hazards and health or safety harm?
So let me just add the proviso that this isn't my lane. So, look, obviously we have duties around psychosocial hazards. And so there has to be an element of people upskilling, but it's not my core area. I'm definitely not an expert. I would refer to the people like you when I'm discussing this, but definitely the psychosocial injury stuff was my domain. So maybe I've missed some critical stuff. But anyway, I've gone through a whole range of modern systematic reviews, meta-analyses. I've covered all of the stuff I covered today. I won't give you the refs, but it's on my site. Just search psychosocial. So one of the questions you sent was around how confident can we be in these findings? And I think that's a really interesting question. So looking at psychosocial work exposures and health outcomes, and this was based on 72 studies, meta-analysis, they concluded that the links between psychosocial work factors, things largely in the control of the organisation, with mental health challenges and cardiovascular disease was moderate. Doesn't mean the link's moderate strength. They're saying the confidence we can have in the overall body of evidence is moderate. For a meta-analysis, that's actually pretty good. Most of the research you find is pretty low quality as far as, there was confounders that weren't managed, or it was a retrospective survey saying, in the last 12 months, have you had any mental health challenges? Talk about your stresses. So that's still a problem. It's a problem with every part of science, as far as I'm aware, most of them, sorry. But they said overall, we can be moderately confident in the state of evidence that there is a statistically significant link between psychosocial factors and mental health and cardiovascular diseases. But the links are stronger with mental health, of course, as you'd expect. Other research I went to, other large-scale meta-analyses, they looked at the pooled effect sizes from all these different studies. They concluded actually the links with very specific things like job strain, long working hours, and other psychosocial factors like that. We have moderate to high evidence for coronary heart disease, stroke, and depression. Depression, again, far easier to connect the two. But they said moderate to high for job strain, and only sort of moderate evidence for long working hours, which surprised me for the body of evidence. Again, that's not saying there isn't a strong connection. It's saying the evidence that we have overall is moderate to high. Moderate to high is almost as good as it gets. Again, if they could get better, stronger claims with gold standard, randomized controlled trials and all that in a perfect world with unlimited money. So straight away, if someone says, where's the evidence or what is the evidence, we have from the largest meta-analyses I can find, we're talking at least 100, 120 studies with some poorer quality studies thrown in. We have moderate to high confidence on those two elements. And there's a bunch of findings more on job strain, which I'll skip over. A whole range of factors. On musculoskeletal, probably to few people's surprise, I'm Jack's complete lack of surprise, we have strong evidence that psychosocial factors are correlated at least. That doesn't mean they're causal, but they're correlated with musculoskeletal disorders. So things that the organization largely controls are linked with people having higher rates of musculoskeletal disorders, so neck and back pain. The neck and back pain lasts longer and doesn't recover as quickly. I don't know if that's the same thing. So particularly low job control, low work time control, high workplace bullying, and high hindrance stresses, role conflict, and a few other things, interpersonal conflict. Strong evidence it's linked to musculoskeletal, particularly of the neck and back. Now, that doesn't mean it's smoking barrel, but we have pretty convincing evidence that it's not just a statistically insignificant or by chance. It's almost certainly something there if we're finding it consistently. And it's not even just common method bias, where you use the same methods, you find the same results. These are across multiple different measurements. Whole bunch of things which I'll skip over. One of the conclusions I actually found really interesting, and just jump in every time you want me to stop and you want to ask questions or tell me to move on. But something I found really interesting was one of these systematic reviews, a recent one, 2023, that looked at 47 studies. They found the same thing, that, musculoskeletal disorders like back pain, shoulder pain were correlated with psychosocial factors like job control, job demands. But they actually concluded their evidence supports the idea that musculoskeletal disorders have a multifactorial, complex etiology that includes psychosocial factors. Therefore, interventions to enhance psychosocial work environment provide opportunities to also reduce the risk of musculoskeletal disorders. So this idea that we spoke about before around you can't really properly, cleanly divorce psychosocial from your SIFs and your major hazard potential stuff. There's almost certainly some sort of link there.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ben. I did read a short research summary from Safe Work New South Wales on the link between psychosocial and musculoskeletal. And they said in many instances, companies who have a mature safety system, they've been able to largely engineer out a lot of musculoskeletal risk through, engineering type controls and elimination. And now the best, or what's going to give the largest incremental gain in reducing musculoskeletal is actually psychosocial hazard interventions.
Yeah, beautiful. In fact, I was just to say, for the statistics nerds, some of this data shows odds ratios of up to 3. So 3 times odds of injuries for back injury when these psychosocial factors in place. I won't go into this one too much, but construction and psychosocial, we have a weaker body of evidence, but still largely, I think, convincing. It's almost always pointed in the same direction. And really interesting, some of the work in construction is a lot of it's qualitative. So they go out there and talk to the construction people, and it's a real frustrating, interesting world, construction. You have very macho climates in place that's still to this day endemic within construction. You have a sense of community though, and they've actually found an Australian study and UK study also found that one of the key inhibitors or one of the key drivers of mental health challenges was that people just didn't want to put their hand up and say, can I have time off to go to my kid's doctor's appointment or sports day? Because they feel like they're letting the team down. So part of it's in them, like they feel like they owe a sense of community. Other was they just don't feel empowered to actually have that conversation. You'd have to be daft is a bit strong, but like to think there's no correlation between those sorts of pressures and any sort of downstream output of factors like in safety. And just very quickly, we'll get onto the evidence for incidents because that one's more mixed. But a recent study actually in the Norwegian oil and gas industry, they used a psychosocial climate tool. And what was interesting about this, it included things like job satisfaction rewards and a whole range of other psychosocial precursors. They found that the psychosocial climate scores were the only thing that predicted loss of containment events. So spilling bad chemicals and oil and stuff that you're not supposed to spill. So straight away, their findings actually contradict that. They found a direct link between this soft woke BS, as it apparently is, and actual tangible loss of containment, spilling stuff and things catching fire that aren't supposed to. And they found it was the only thing that predicted that. And that aligns pretty strongly with Dov Zohar's work on safety climate. It's quite a very forward-looking predictive. I wouldn't necessarily make that claim, but there does seem to be something to it. Now, this was a single study. There's actually a couple more on my site with similar findings. Survey data, so huge caution with interpreting that. Don't run off and use that as your justification, your business case. But I think we're at a place now we would have to conclude that the burden of evidence isn't in our camp anymore. Like, we've got so much evidence. It's definitely in the critics' camps to show us the evidence now that this is just woke BS and we don't need to focus on psychosocial, because surely we've shifted the dial more than enough now. I think more than enough.
Yeah. And that's why I don't engage with them, Ben, because they don't want to do the work like you have to go, well, what is the contrary evidence? Because, you know, it largely wouldn't exist. Definitely not in meta-analysis form, as you would know.
Oh, yeah, and they throw out, actually, this is pretty common. I've covered a bit of work on mis and disinformation and conspiracies, and these are all very common human things, and I do it too. I'm sure I do it. But what people do is not just cherry picking data and disqualification bias and things, but you're overly critical of the disconfirming evidence. And that's what they do, and that's one of the tactics they use. Again, everyone does it. It's not just them, but that's why there's very little point engaging with that stuff. I agree with you, because the more you present research, the more critical they are of, well, who's funding that? You know, what is it? It's not big pharma. It's like big psychosocial, or whoever the global cabal is that manage the conspiracy around. And I have to admit, they've done a pretty good job of fooling everyone. Apparently, like we can't even coordinate like a mega construction project, but by God, we can convince billions of people around the world and have this really finessed conspiracy. So yes, that we have really sophisticated biological cognitive mechanisms to remove doubt and uncertainty. And it's the same, I think, with these ones. So they'll just criticize the studies, the sample sizes, which, yep, we should do that. But even when you present a meta-analysis, and they've pulled the effects from 300,000 people from multiple studies, they've done an analysis of the bias, the study quality, even then people will pick out, well, that's still, they only looked at those 4 industries or 10 industries. So look, what can you say? There's still valid concerns in some sense, but at some point, the onus of evidence shifts. And I think it's well and truly shifted, like, without doubt. And I think it shifted probably at least in the late 90s. Surely it must have shifted at least by the 90s. And that's why I said I found it interesting is you go to ergonomics and biomechanics. I won't say there aren't dissidents and people that deny it, but it's far less controversial around psychosocial factors, at least with musculoskeletal injuries.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that, they put out these controversial comments or statements and then people probably DM them going, oh, I've been thinking the same, and then they just get more encouragement to continue to put that stuff out there without actually coming up with the contrary evidence like you suggest they need.
I got sick of one troll once, and all I did was when he kept on giving me, well, this is what I've seen. Look, this has been a bit of an a-hole, but I just responded to his comments saying n equals 1 for each of them. So it was like it doesn't help the argument, but makes me feel better.
Yep.
Now, the links with, sorry, mate, I cut you off. You go.
No. I was going to say just block. I only have like a one kind of trolling comment policy. If it happens once, I might be able to they might be able to get away with it if it's done respectfully. I don't need them in my life.
But I think like what's also important there, Ben, is for other people who are reading that thread as well, right? It's not necessarily about changing the opinion of that person who's being, intentionally inflammatory for whatever reason, but it is actually about putting through that counter to the argument that they're putting forward, so that other people who are actually reading that because it's something that they're interested in or they're wanting to learn more about it or kind of try to land on a position on it, that they can actually see those counter views about that narrative.
If the person's willing to engage in an intellectual discussion and not have a huge bias and doesn't want to change.
I mean, yes and no though, because then that impacts their credibility for other people who are reading through that.
You know what I do? I don't comment and I always encourage my team not to do the same because they all want to get on and correct the person.
Yeah, no,
right?
you don't want to give it.
Yeah, because the algorithm works, right? The
Yeah.
more you engage with people, then the more people will see it. And it's just like, don't even engage because they're just going to come back with something that's wrong and more people are just going to see it. It's just, don't give them any more air. Anyway, enough about trolls. This is not a podcast about trolls and how to deal with it.
This is a tangent, but I'll make it quick. I've covered I can't remember what it's called now, but I've covered a misinformation, disinformation handbook that some international authority published. I got a whole bunch of experts on mis and disinformation. It was circulated particularly around COVID. And look, they say very clearly, using empirical arguments against emotive arguments isn't effective. It's never been effective. But they say there's a whole range of benefits of doing it. I think it's kind of, Joelle, to your point around, you have a consistent position that's communicated, it's clearly articulated, and there's a flow-on effect. Other people keep reading it. And by saturation, you've consistently put out a clear message around what the evidence is. So they say that based on the limited evidence there is, it's still probably the best approach. But then you go to researchers from the cognitive sphere like Paul Slovic and other researchers that look at decisions and judgments. And they've kind of argued the opposite. I think Gigerenza maybe did the same. They said you kind of need to fight fire with fire and use emotive arguments to counter emotive arguments. And anyway.
But then some people do it poorly. You do it very well, Ben, and find really good evidence. I remember I've written about it a number of times on LinkedIn, but, the lack of research clarifying a distinct link between psychological safety and mental health outcomes. And, I'd have people write back and try and provide the evidence, right? Oh, look, this is a research article or whatever. They talk about it. And you read the research article and they make this broad statement, but they don't reference where it came from. So there's really bad peer-reviewed research out there that is just making these sweeping claims that are actually linking back to actual research.
And this is why I don't make too much out of any individual study. And this is just a standard, this is just me, this is a standard process with science. But it's very hard, when you get all the sound bites and they go viral, the ones that are the biggest sort of the shocks and controversies. But yes, we look for bodies of evidence. And this is what the argument I used with those trolls around psychosocial. I said, on any individual study you can criticize, it's probably valid criticisms. But when we've got statistically controlled bodies of one of those meta-analyses, one of many, was 73 studies of only the moderate to high quality research. They didn't even include the poor quality stuff. At what point do you need to stop and consider what is it that would actually change your mind? I don't think the issue's with the evidence anymore. It's with you, and it's maybe your ignorance around scientific standards and what evidence means, but there's absolutely a point where you have to just you should be drawing a line. But the criticism or the challenges around the links with psychosocial and injuries and incidents, that's where it's far murkier. So I've covered a whole bunch of research on that on my side, and if you're interested, I can cover some of the core stuff.
Sure. We've got, what's the time? We've got time.
We've got time, yeah. Yes,
Give
definitely.
us your 3 to 5 minute summary, Ben.
Yeah, that's more than enough. So the Cliff Notes version is we probably have low to moderate evidence that psychosocial factors are correlated with some types of safety outputs. Now, there's a whole bunch of different outputs you can measure. That's not necessarily incidents, but let's say purely on injuries. Musculoskeletal is, for sure, we have fairly decent moderate evidence that there is some sort of link between it, and it's probably not just by chance. Safety incidents, like if you're in construction and your triffers and all that, the evidence is pretty weak, inconsistent. So that's where it really falls down. If people want evidence that, like psychological safety, I get this question like from one of the leading critics. What's the link with psychosocial safety, like from Edmondson's construction and safety incidents? I'll say, for one, I don't think anyone studied that. For two, that's assuming we'd even have a data set large enough to measure it. And three, there's probably no direct link between that we can readily measure. Now, I don't doubt that high-performing healthcare clinics couldn't find some sort of link. And certainly we have it with safety, psychosocial climate and safety climate. But we have to also really challenge the denominator on that, so that the sample they're actually measuring the incidents. And we don't have a lot of reasons to really trust the data on those incidents. Let's say gigantic samples. So far less of a relationship that we're confident about with incidents and psychosocial, except for maybe musculoskeletal and some of those. But even then, it's still challenging. We're talking about the laws of large numbers. You have to use things like Poisson distributions, negative binomials to account for extremely rare. You don't even need to know what they are. People don't know what they are, but we need some pretty sophisticated statistical models to even begin to start modeling. And this is a challenge with knowing what something statistically significant is. We need to measure a change from something. And the good thing about the Poisson is it gives you an estimation of what we could have expected based on the mean. But then you have the issue of the average. The mean is you just don't have enough of these things to start with. So all sorts of troubles with that. But yes, there is some evidence, not as confident about it. But there is some more recent evidence around suicide ideation that seems fairly convincing around psychosocial factors. And obviously, this doesn't require people to be, can't remember what the correct term is. It's not successful suicide. It's
completed
suicides. That one's a bit more challenging because the total number is smaller than the people that attempt it. Ideation have ideas around it, but there does seem to be a relationship with organizations and their organizational psychosocial factors and suicide ideation. Again, I wouldn't call it moderate to strong evidence, but there seems to be enough of it. And we spoke before around the psychosocial one on offshore spills. There's actually another large industrial study that looked at the links between safety critical work and psychosocial factors. It was a systematic review, not a meta-analysis. So they didn't pull all the effect sizes. They didn't add them all up to show what their overall strength was. But they concluded, based on the evidence, there's at least plausible empirical links between psychosocial factors and safety behaviours. And that was stronger than the safety outcome events. So we have good evidence that psychosocial factors influence the inputs, the things that we do, and a little shakier on the outputs apart from a few things. But what was interesting about this study was they said things like job demands, the job demand factors, are likely to trigger employees' health impairing behaviours. So they have to be considered as a precursor. We have really convincing evidence. If it's affecting all these precursors to injuries that we know have pretty strong links, it's not hard then to extend that causal chain down and say it's probably going to be linked at some point. And that's what I was thinking, like the idea of maybe talking about unsafe behaviour is definitely uncomfortable for some people and easily challenge that. So I'd say don't dwell on the findings of that study too much around unsafe behaviour because that's a judgment. But certainly they found that psychosocial factors influence people's risk cautions and their precautionary behaviours. So people are less likely to take protective behaviours to protect themselves with high psychosocial factors. And it's absolutely linked to absenteeism, presenteeism, and things like that.
Ben, going back to what you're talking about with some of the research regarding incidents, which would extend to fatalities, I guess, as well. I'm reminded, I think it was Drew Ray that was saying we need to kill more people because there's not enough of
because
these.
the number is so low that any change is statistical noise rather than meaningful.
Yeah. Do you remember exactly what Drew Ray said about that?
Yeah, so he says we don't kill enough people. That's right. Statistically, that's true. And when you look at Matt Hallowell, the Construction Safety Research Alliance's recent, like it was from a few years ago now, 2022, still recent, the statistical invalidity of TRIR, so total recordable injury rates, you can substitute that with anything, any of these injury measures, LTIFR, fatalities. Essentially what they said was they took, I'll get these numbers wrong, but let's just pretend they had like 3 trillion hours for their calculations. 3 trillion. And even then, they were struggling to be able to build plausible statistical models to account for how rare injuries and fatalities are. So they said you need something ridiculous. I forget what it is. It could be 10 billion, 30 billion, 5 billion, whatever it is. You need billions of hours to have a statistically significant sample size for monthly LTIFR, TFIFR, like TRIFR and LTIFR. That's the basic. To be able to plausibly be confident around, we've got a statistically significant change from one month to another. So that's your LTIFR went from 3.2 down to 3 or 2.9. You need something absolutely ridiculous to be able to say statistically that's a plausible finding, be confident of it. Because you have normal variation noise. It's always going up and down every month. And in fact, even Daniel Kahneman, you read his bestseller, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about regression to the mean. And this is someone that's been very critical of some of these out there ideas. Like he's very black and white in some areas around. He uses words like complacency and like dumb decisions and things. Still a brilliant researcher, foundational, but even he's saying regression to the mean is just such a common thing where over time all that variability will inevitably fall down to a baseline level and sort of hover around that. So Hallowell's work said you need a huge data set, and they said pretty much using TRIFR month to month, even I think less than you need something like 5 years of data to begin with or 10 years of data to begin with. And it's statistically insignificant before a certain time frame to say that it's gone up or down over a month. Now consider fatalities, which are even rarer. We're talking about orders of magnitude rarer. You would need astronomical data. I don't know, 50 billion, 100 billion, a trillion, trillions of hours maybe to be able to build a statistical model that's statistically significant, that have error margins that aren't ridiculous. Now, people do it. They absolutely do it, and that doesn't mean there's no value in it. But Drew spoke about this actually in a video I shared on YouTube of his on the circus of safety. And he said what you can't do, though, is differentiate that change from random variation, just the random noise that you have every month, the ups and downs. And that's the challenge there. It's indistinguishable from just normal variation. That's not saying there isn't a real change, but we can't tell what it is.
Yeah, it's a deep cut from Drew, and I did want to use it. Remember, very early on in our podcast, we had Dr. Beck McCulloch.
Yeah, who said we don't sexually harass enough people.
Yeah, well, she said it was something like that, because she was saying sexual harassment policies don't work until people see them enacted. And so I was going to use that cut from Drew Ray to say we need to sexually harass more people and put that above Beck McCulloch's clip on our podcast like we used to do. And then Joelle wisely said, no, don't do that.
Well, I believe what I said was maybe check with her first before you do that.
No, then I wisely thought that's probably too inflammatory and people might get the wrong idea. So.
Can you please do that and do a pop-up meme with dodgeball? Like that's a bold strategy, Colin. Let's hope it
I do love your pop culture references, and I do love your Fight Club references that you've been using, Ben. So kudos.
All right. Ben, what is your favourite published safety paper?
I don't have one, but Barry Turner is a sociologist, one of the most foundational researchers in the modern sort of trajectory of safety science. Him and his colleague, Nick Pigeon, they published a paper called, oh, no, sorry, actually it wasn't with Barry. It was from Nick Pigeon and O'Leary, but called Man-Made Disasters, Why Organizations Sometimes Fail. But it's based heavily on Barry Turner's work. I just think it's a beautiful reflection and condensation of Barry's work and Nick's work. And they're talking about how, we focus so much on the things that go wrong. And Holnagel's used this example all the time, that we focus on the 1 in 1,000 where it went wrong, and we ignore the 999 times it went right, like it went to plan, or we at least did it. Maybe it wasn't fully to plan, but we got it roughly right. And what he's saying is we shouldn't ignore the 1 out of 1,000, but we've got over 900 other opportunities to learn from. Why does it normally seem to succeed? And in fact, that's what Nick Pigeon was talking about in this Man-Made Disasters paper, was most of the time organizations aren't blowing up, things aren't being destroyed. Most of the time things are operating, we get our jobs done really well, or at least well enough. We satisfy us, we do the first acceptable course of action. And that's what makes it even harder when we have these catastrophic failures. So in fact, Turner reconstructed the idea of what disaster means just from a purely technical thing, the flames and the damage, to more of a psychological or social perspective around it's the collapse of the belief systems in organizations and people, that how the hell did we kill all those people? We thought we were safe. So it's a really beautiful paper. Another one is Bob Wares, the late Bob Wares. He was a doctor, US doctor. It's just absolute poetry. So it's called The Tragedy of Adaptability. It's on my site. You can share it. I can share the links. It's like 2 pages, but man, it is just poetry. And it talks about how the problem with resilience is the way that organizations tend to succeed is not because of the systems, it's because of people filling in all the gaps. And you don't see that on the surface, like people just do things, they get it done, they fill the gaps, they work around. And so it's like that quintessential duck, it's calm, in serenity, floating on the top, and then its little legs under the water, paddling like crazy. It's like that. It's all these adaptive behaviors of people that keep things functioning. And like he's talking about healthcare, and it is probably the best example, healthcare, of socio-technical systems. It's largely a people system. People keep it functioning, and it's all the knowledge is trapped within people in that one. And eventually people have a breaking point. They don't want to break, but they have a breaking point. And that's where we introduce really catastrophic failure modes, is well-intentioned activities and systems. So those are 2 beautiful papers. And then highly recommend Diane Vaughan's Challenger Launch Decision book, where she analyzes the Challenger disaster from 86, but in a sociological lens. It's one of the best reads. It is probably the best read I've ever had. And then Scott Snook's Black Hawk Shootdown, which talks about drift. So he adapts a lot of Vaughan's work and others. So there's probably 4 things that really interest me.
That's going to keep our listeners busy for a while, I think.
Yes, definitely. Well, definitely the safety nerd listeners anyway.
There's a fair few of them on.
There is.
Yeah. Particularly at this point on the podcast.
Yeah.
If they're still listening.
That's true. That's true. And we love them.
Yeah. So Ben, we're getting towards the end of the podcast now, and there's a question we like to ask all of our guests at the end, and that is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health? And maybe we go more into your lane and go, well, psychosocial safety at work.
I would say, maybe this is controversial. I'm not yet convinced that our mental health psychosocial systems should be fully integrated into existing health and safety structures yet. And I'll preface that why. I think we have a small but decent number of studies that highlight domain specificity. They show that by focusing on particular issues, you can actually elevate the priorities and language around those issues. And by essentially forcing the psychosocial stuff into existing health and safety, I think there is a potential risk of it falling down in priorities. It just sort of gets absorbed. Now, that's not to say you can't design that better to begin with, but I think that, at least based on limited evidence, it's probably a case where we should have it at least somewhat separate, not completely separate, different teams and everything. But I think it should stand a little bit separate so we can sell it as its own idea to a degree. It gets priority over just other stuff that we do. And something I think is really important here, there was some research from Europe, and this does tie in with my own practice, by the way. They found something really seminal, I think, really important, and I've covered their work on my pod, I think, and also on my site. They found that existing safety management systems are not well equipped for managing complex psychosocial issues. They found that complex social matters are converted into very simplistic boxes in health and safety systems, and particularly audit regimes like ISO 18001, 45001. We don't mean to do it, but an auditor has to audit the psychosocial system, so they come up with some really simple criteria. So because they've come up with the criteria, the organization changes what they do. They game the system essentially, not intentionally, to match the criteria. And essentially, we treat these complex things as really simple things. And they found that was common across certified systems like these ISO certified systems. So transfer auditing in these certified systems transforms what we do. And that my concern is by fully integrating the psychosocial stuff within the existing, the structuration, the existing systems of safety, it's almost inevitable that same thing's going to happen. Like they've already found it, and it's probably going to happen with us. And it's not always bad, but I think we can probably slow it down with some sort of techniques around ensuring that it really is fit for purpose, like it's actually properly addressing psychosocial matters, human needs, humanity-based design, or human-centered design, however you want to call it. So I think that's one of the key things for my focus, and I think for the broader sector is, now I don't think they're all going to be focusing on that particular issue, but I think that issue is always going to be there, and it's going to be shaping what we do. And I am concerned that these well-intentioned approaches for psychosocial will be just largely absorbed into a tick box, tick and flick thing, which will have some benefits, but it'll miss the largely human interconnected sort of stuff. And then we can say, we've got all these red wrist ends of the green. We're happy with ourselves. The watermelon reports. We've essentially addressed psychosocial risks, and then you scratch the surface, and of course we haven't actually changed any interpersonal risk-taking, the microaggressions and bullying. We haven't changed the structures of the organization. We still have the same job resource demands and all that stuff.
So was there a hope there, or is that just a prediction? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get people out of bed at 3:30 a.m. to get on a flight so that they can get to work and then work the day.
And in their time, often, not always, but when I did fly in, fly out, I was in the 28/9s in oil and gas. So you did 28 days straight, and you travel in your time out of the 9 days. Whatever, you look back, it was exciting, but you can't then sort of wonder why we've got some of these issues with people, disgruntled people. Like, yes, they chose to sign up and come out there, but we know from research that that's not even the critical factor. Like, and in fact, legally, I've seen case law and examples of prosecutions where even the courts don't accept that. They say, yes, they chose to come out there, but you still controlled the risk. You created the risk, you controlled the risk, you incentivized the risk. It's on you.
Someone chooses a job as a scaffolder, that doesn't mean that you don't still give them full protection. Yeah. Hey, Ben, do you reckon, like I'm just thinking about where you're talking about sort of domain specificity there and thinking about, you know, in like the way that process safety has needed to sort of carve itself out as something that is still, it's safety, but the way that it's managed and kind of the governance aspects of it need to be nuanced within an organisation. Do you think something like that with psychosocial safety would potentially work?
I'm not sure about that. Process safety definitely has needed its own because the types of failure modes we're talking about are just vastly different. Now, I guess if you could argue that the failure modes, the things that hurt people, there's the interpersonal risks, the job design factors, all that. But when I say yes, potentially, in fact, it's good to see, you know, specific standards and codes of practice around it, even though I think they are sort of pitched at safety quite often. I think there's probably value in it, but I'm not yet sure we need to go to that extent with psychosocial because process safety is quite different in the sense of the things that blow up. And it's been, and the things that address those sorts of failure modes are largely in the engineers domain. So it's been mostly engineers doing it for very good reasons. Whereas psychosocial, and this is one of those arguments that really annoys me. I'm not a psychologist, so why should I be doing all this fluffy stuff? And you're like, you don't need to be a psychologist, bro. Like for half this stuff, it's in your control. You don't need to do like Freudian analysis of their relationship with their parents. Like they're asking you just to look at the factors that contribute to it, like psychosocial or mental health risk with psychosocial factors, with interpersonal risk taking, things that we largely control and create in organizations. So that's a long way of saying I don't know about that. You're probably better placed to answer than I am. I don't think it needs to be the extent of process safety, but I do think there's a lot of value in it holding its own and coming up with its own tools. And I think the recent hierarchy of controls for psychosocial is a really cool application of that. It's not just forcing people to shoehorn ideas into the existing hierarchy, like it's its own hierarchy. And whether it's the right or the best approach, it's still crafting its own specialty. And then I think we're in a better place to properly integrate that into existing routines across the whole business while still maintaining some of it as a specialized approach. Like you'll still have specialists who do that as their bread and butter. And then you'll have all the bunch of the other stuff that everyone needs to contribute to. And arguably the most important stuff is the leaders when they create all these reward and incentive structures, the job titles and the job descriptions and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Is that a cop-out answer? I don't know if I answered it.
No, it's just I think it's food for thought, right? All right, last question for you. Parting words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of psychological health and safety.
I'm not best placed to answer this as a practitioner, as far as like, I'm involved in psychosocial stuff as my day job, but it's definitely not my lane. So I've been getting advice from people that do this as their day job. But when I think about it, I think there's a recalibration that's needed. For one, the recalibrations around what should we be doing for managing psychosocial hazards and creating just safer and healthier work environments versus what we've already been doing or what we think we've been doing. And what I mean is, like, we certainly do a lot of stuff like the resilience training, the fruit bowls, the yoga. There's other stuff, less cynical stuff that we do, but it's actually making sure that it's very goal directed. Like we have a clear pathway for how those things are going to fit into it and help create safer, healthier environments. So I think that's the advice I would be giving. That's just as much for me, is to think about how do we design those into the environment as best we can. For the cynics and the critics, I would say we're all humans. So very human things like psychosocial factors influence humans because that's what we are. There's always exceptions. There's always socio and psychopaths that don't feel the same emotions that we do, but and narcissists, but they're far rarer. For most people, most of the time, even these apparently mechanical engineers and others, They do have very similar emotions to everyone else. That's not an opinion. We have research that shows that. They do think differently, typically, people that go into those professions. But I just think it's a really jank argument to think that these fluffy things don't apply. Like, to even call it fluffy, that's a worldview, because we're all human. And finally, the big part, I think, is for the emerging leaders in this area, is we need to be considering how to navigate the shift in large language models and agentive models. So besides navigating sort of the legal and ethical landscape of psychosocial, we should do it because it's the right thing to do. It's a legal duty and it's good for business, the bottom line. Like, it improves productivity, it reduces turnover. But we've always had large change in sort of the industrial era, at least. We've had automation, we've had steam engines, we've had computers, but I don't think, I could be corrected here, I don't think we've had any other change that's completely reformed the change in cognitive work than these new AI models. So I've covered some research soon on my show that AI actually changes how we talk, it changes how we think, it changes or it affects skill decay, but it also improves other things. But really interesting, I've just covered a study which found that use of AI, large language models, reduces work meaningfulness. So it increases insecurity, it affects people's creativity, increases alienation, motivation, some other things, because it's taken away one of the few things they actually enjoyed about their job, the creativity. So I think psychosocial factors are more important now than they've probably ever been at scale. And we have to consider these joint cognitive systems with people in the environment, because we have largely new or at least accelerated issues at scale to consider.
That's probably one of the most complex answers to that question we've had.
And you'd expect it from someone like Ben.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know ChatGPT has definitely changed the way I work, at least the way I write. I use a lot less M dashes these days because now it just looks like ChatGPT's written it for me. I love the M dash and now I can't use it anymore.
I think there should be like a state funeral for the M dashes. I loved them. You go back to my earliest work, I used them, but now I don't. But just quickly, this isn't just large language models. There's a whole raft of other agentive models. They've existed for a long time, but certainly the large-scale adoption. So ChatGPT is the quickest adopted thing of all time. I just say thing broadly. Like, it was billions of people within 5 days or something used it. No point in history if people ever adopted anything. Maybe the first animal that ever drank water. I don't know, but nothing else has ever come close to that. And it's changing so much stuff, a lot for good and some things unexpected and some things bad. And I think there's going to be a definite element around psychosocial.
Yeah, in fact, that was a comment that was made from some at PHSCon. We didn't actually touch on that at all. And maybe it's something that we need to get someone like Ben along to talk about one time. But by then, hey, look, maybe Skynet, and we won't have to worry about AI anymore because we'll just be running from the robots.
Yeah, well, no, I, for one, welcome our robot overlords.
Yes.
So, the strategy is, if you want to hedge your bets, like Pascal's wager, just use please and thanks in your responses.
Yeah, but Sam Altman was saying, please stop using please when you talk to ChatGPT because it's costing us so much
It's a waste of resources, yes.
So...
maybe that's because he's trying to be the only one that talks nicely.
He's lying to us. Yeah.
I think it's the most successful business that doesn't make money. And in fact, they're in the opposite direction.
Yeah, something like 46 billion a year they're losing. Anyway, that's another podcast. Ben, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your both your practitioner lens as well as being able to refer to the evidence in the psychosocial space. I'm sure this will be an instant classic and will be an episode that a lot of our listeners refer back to when really trying to think about, well, what is the evidence for psychosocial? And we'll definitely be linking to your compendium and maybe some other resources as well in the show notes, if that's okay with you. Terrific. Thanks, Ben. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video. If you do want to check out any of our past videos, check it out on the Flourish GX YouTube channel. And then you'll also be able to catch the snippets, the best of those video clips on the Flourish GX LinkedIn page. While you're over there, feel free to connect with myself and Joelle. And Ben always loves engaging in discourse regarding any safety-related matter, including psychosocial. So feel free to reach out to him too. But that's it for today. Thank you, and we'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.